This PowerPoint will teach you the basics of how to create a podcast using the University of Louisville Education Activities podcast server located at the University of Louisville College of Education and Human Development. This podcast server was created to help students in the Commonwealth to bring their stories to a worldwide audience. We have been very successful with this. We have podcasts from as far away as Ashland to Bowling Green to Owensboro to Louisville, Prestonsburg. We are all over the map in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So the goal for this should be that we need to define what a podcast is, and podcasting what a podcaster is. We need to learn to use the podcasting software here at the University of Louisville, which is very, very simple. You will not have any trouble. We need to talk about how a team develops the podcasting presence for their school. And we need to understand how to build a school podcasting website. You do not have to build a school podcasting website. You can just podcast. But having the website helps people understand what you're trying to do with your podcast and your episodes. So what is a podcast? Well, Wikipedia tells us that it's a series of digital media files distributed over the internet. Distribution is done by a subscription service using RSS. And podcasts can be listened to on a computer or a portable MP3 player. We should add here that tablet computers, just about anything that has a connection to the internet, smartphones, can subscribe and listen to your podcast. And of course, the host or authors of a podcast are called podcasters. Now notice in this list here that I put up, nowhere does it mention any specific type of computer or platform. It's a misnomer to think that podcasting can only be created and only be listened to on an Apple product. That is not the case. You can listen to podcasts and subscribe to them through Internet Explorer, Firefox, on a smartphone, on an iPhone, on a tablet. It could be an iPad or it could be an Android tablet. You can create podcasts on any PC or any Mac. It's a very, very simple process. Here's what we think are some of the uses for a podcast. To record and distribute news broadcasts. A lot of schools like to capture what they're doing at the school, the morning news broadcast, and put it out there so that anyone can see and hear about what's going on at their school. We have teachers who use the podcast service to capture what they do in their classrooms. Here at the University of Louisville, our professors use this a lot. They record their class lectures and notes and presentations, and students have a chance to see them over and over again. If we can do that for college students, why can't we be doing that for high school and middle school students? If your school is a magnet school, or if it depends upon people coming to it that doesn't necessarily have a resides area, then the audio-video recruiting development, this is a chance for you to get the message out about what a great place your school is. We see private parochial schools wanting to podcast about what goes on in their buildings so people can have informed decisions. Recorded meeting and conference notes, we have very seldom ever seen this happen, but it'd be a great way to get your SBDM council ideas and meetings out to the stakeholders of your school. Oral history archiving and on-demand distribution, we've had all kinds of experiments with this where kids have created projects that show off a particular aspect of the curriculum. We'll show you examples of those. There are some really fabulous examples that go on out there in the state of Kentucky. And finally, we have schools that capture the sporting events, specifically high schools, and then they turn those into podcasts so that alumni from anywhere in the world can come back and see what's happening at their former high school. What do you need? Not much. You need a computer connected to the internet, PC or Mac. You need microphones to record with. You need headphones to hear your final product. And you should have a camera to do video podcast. Most of the software is free. We use Audacity for our audio ones, Movie Maker on the PC side, iMovie on the Mac side. And if you need to use a video converter, we always recommend Coyote Video Converter. Specifically, if you're using Movie Maker, Movie Maker does not save in a format that can be podcasted. So we use the Coyote Video Converter to do that. Our podcasts are created by our ULEAP server here, and this is the address, https://uleap.louisville.edu. Your address would be https://uleap.louisville.edu/groups/ the name of your school. Now, name of school can also be name of organization. It could be the STLP group. There isn't a real set standard for what school name means. So we want you to understand that it could be the school name or it could be Mrs. Smith's class. It's up to you. So how do we start? We have to plan, we have to design, and we have to implement. So our first part of the plan is simple. We have to figure out who are we creating these files for? Who is our target audience? Are we targeting towards parents? Are we targeting towards potential parents? Are we targeting for the community? Who are we talking to? Format. Are we going to be an audio podcast? Or are we going to be a video podcast? And of course, if you're a video podcast, we always assume that you have an audio component. If you are going to do video podcasts, think about how you're going to film and what you're going to film about. Video podcasts in a lot of ways are simpler than audio podcasts, but it does require you to think through, storyboard, etc., how you're creating the video. Scheduling. Scheduling means how often are these things going to come out? Once a week, every 2 weeks, once a month? And you have to stick to that schedule because people will expect you to be there. Just like you expect your newspaper to be there every morning or your favorite magazine to get delivered every month. So you have to really do a commitment to what you're creating. And then finally you have to assign who does what. The teacher or the STLP coordinator is always the executive producer. In other words, they're the person who has the final say on what goes out the door. Students are what we used to call in the newspaper business stringers. They go out and find stories, bring them back, and then the executive producer basically says, sounds like a great idea, let's run with it. And then the folks who run the cameras and do the editing, they go to work, and we finally have a product that we then post out as a podcast. You want a consistent episode format, and that usually involves having a teaser and a tagline. A teaser and a tagline mean you have a certain phrase or saying that you use at the beginning of every one of your podcasts. Welcome to our school's podcast, where all the news that's interesting is presented to you on a weekly basis. A tagline. Thank you for watching our school's podcast. Come back next week to see more exciting episodes about what goes on at our school. You want to have episode artwork if you want us to put it at the beginning of every one of your episodes. So if you have a school mascot or if you have just a picture of your school that you'd like to come up and be there at the beginning of every one of the episodes. If you will send us that in a JPEG or PNG format, we will be glad to put that at the beginning of every one of your episodes. You don't have to do a thing. You just send it to us. And you need to think about the naming and description of each episode. Is it going to be simply episode 1, or will it have a date attached to it? And the description needs to be concise, to the point, but interesting. You need a work area. You need someplace just to be able to sit down and get all this done. And you need to organize the work area. You don't necessarily want to have a place where someone is recording in an area that's really noisy. And you need to keep a schedule for creating. You need to have a schedule for creating. And finally, you get the word out. You could do that through your local PTA. You can do that through notes that go home every day. You will be surprised how many people will listen to what you create. So, our first step, create a topic. Get that teaser and that tagline created. Create a script outline. Record the podcast. Produce and publish it. Make sure everything is right. Quality control. Here's how you do it. First of all, you go to this address, https://uleap.louisville.edu. Now, the first time you come here, it'll look like this. You are going to do most of your work utilizing the podcast capture. It's where your episodes go. Your wiki is where you can create that website about your podcast. You don't have to have a website about your podcast for it to work. Your blog is nothing more than a storage cabinet, a file cabinet, if you will, where all your episodes are organized and kept safe. So, we click on Podcast Capture. You must log in using your admin name and password. And then you click on where it says File. A box pops up and says, well, where is your file? So your audio file, your video file, your finished product is now what it's waiting for. And so you click on the Browse button, you go find that file, and then you click on OK. Once here, you'll notice under Workflow, that'll be the name of your podcast. We're using the general one that we use here. And as you can see, we've named it Episode 1 Robotics. And then the description is the Red Ball Challenge. So this is obviously a podcast about a school that is getting into the area of robotics, and they want to start sharing with their students the exciting things they're doing. Finally, when you get all that filled in, you click Publish. Your file takes only a matter of a minute at the very most to get uploaded. Remember, when you are creating your file, do not use any type of punctuation in your file name. Now, this is not your podcast name. We're not talking about the podcast name that you've just completed. We're talking about the file that you did in iMovie or Movie Maker or Adobe Pinnacle. We don't want you to use punctuation in those file names. The web does not like punctuations. Keep it simple. In a matter of minutes, your upload will be finished, and it's ready for you to upload another one if you'd like to. Now let's talk about uploads for a second. Uploads are determined by the size of your file, and we usually think about that in terms of minutes. In other words, how long our file runs. If you're uploading, say, a 6-minute podcast, 6 to 15 minutes, it'll take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes to upload, depending upon the speed of the network at your school. If you want to have a much longer file, you need to be aware that your school district's network administrator may have a limit on the time that you can be connected to an external service, like our podcast server. We'll show you an email at the end here of our technician. So if you have any questions like that, and we always recommend when we do our first training that we have your district's IT person talk to our podcast technician so that we can get all the firewall settings correct, and that all these issues like this can be settled right away. You just need to talk to us. So let's talk about creating that website. Well, here's what it looks like. Not much to it. But as you can see, there are some things about this that are very important to know. So we're going to walk you through how to do that. To start working on this page, you need to click on the pencil. Once you've clicked on the pencil, you need to click on Settings. Now, Settings is where you basically turn what is essentially a web page and a blog into a podcast. You can also change the look of your podcast website here by going down to the themes, and you can click on that and you can see a whole bunch of different themes. But what you really want to make sure you do here is click on the services link and go in and click on create a podcast. And of course you want to select that it's an education podcast. When you've done that simple step, you now have a podcast. It's as easy as that. Over here in the blog, as you can see, there's a link that says subscribe to iTunes. Now that's a little bit misleading because it seems like that the only way that you can see here your podcast is if you have iTunes loaded on your computer. That is the farthest from the truth. This is an Apple product, so they try to keep it all within their little world. But I carry around an Android smartphone. And when I click on this link through the browser on my Android smartphone, the podcast catcher that I have on my Android phone pops up, and it does the same thing as iTunes does. It captures it. When you are wanting to watch your podcast through the browser on your computer, we'll show you how to do that in just a second. But rest assured here, you can subscribe to your podcast on almost any type of device now. As you can see here, this particular school put in a very simple graphic, very simple introduction to their school, and then they put a link at the bottom that takes them to the page where all of their episodes are kept. And that's all there is to it. The episodes are kept on a page called the blog, and here you are. And what the blog does is it just keeps track of all of the media files that you have uploaded. That's all it does. So as you can see here, they're up to episode 39, Hearts and Stars, on their podcast. It's a very busy podcast. And if we could scroll down, you would see that there are 38 other podcasts before this one. Notice how they've been very consistent with naming it episode 39, gave it a specific kind of name, and then they have a description that tells you what it's all about. So if we were to go in here and look, we could see some really good examples. Feel free to write these down and go take a look. I think you will be very impressed with what you see here. I'll wait a minute so you can get these written down. Finally, if you would like to have a podcast, you can contact me here at this address. And Josh Reynolds is our technician, and that's his address. And I'm also on Skype. We were always very willing and ready to schedule a Skype meeting with you where we can show you things live and see what's going on your site if there's a problem. We Skype all over the state of Kentucky, and we have had very good results with it. Now let's talk about this subscribing bit. When you subscribe in iTunes, when you make that click, what it does is it pops up and it shows you in iTunes where your podcast will be stored. It's that simple. But what if I don't have iTunes? Well, in Internet Explorer, you click on the RSS feed icon, which is this little icon up here in the toolbar right next to the home button. When you click on that, what it does is it will pop up and it'll say there's a feed here that has an RSS. In other words, it's subscribable. And it asks you, do you want to subscribe to this feed? All you have to do is click on that. It'll come up and it'll ask you where you want to save the feed. It has a default. It's called Feeds, believe it or not. You click one more time, and now you have subscribed. And so what will happen is, as new episodes are uploaded, when you go back into your Internet Explorer, that little icon will glow bright orange, and it tells you that you now are subscribing to a podcast. That's all there is to it. In Firefox, all you have to do is, if you're on a page that has a podcast, you can go up to bookmarks and come down to where it says subscribe, and it will do the same thing. Every time you go in, a little message will pop up and tell you that a new episode is present. That's all you have to do. Now, creating the podcast, the most important thing, of course, is what you use to create with. And so you have to become not only developers of product, but you have to learn how to use Movie Maker or iMovie or Pinnacle Studio 8 or Adobe Premiere. But remember, your stories are going out to the world. Anybody can hear or see your podcasts. So you want to develop a schedule for recording it, and you want to stick to it. Good luck.